Hey Francois, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. So I'm starting off with normally I'm not in my apartment. I have a giant Bob Dylan poster I've had since I was 18 years old. I have a shirt that I've had since I was 11, so it's 22 years old. Like Bob Dylan is kind of that artist for me as a
Wow.
person. But you had the job of having to recreate things that now are ingrained in people like mine minds, where they know it like the back of their hand. And so for you, what was the biggest challenge of helping to bring specifically like the early part of Bob Dylan's career to life in a way that like was looking at this movie like, yes, I know exactly what that's supposed to be, and that's what it looked like from the pictures that I've seen and things like that.
Well, I think that anybody can sort of recreate the famous iconic images that we've all seen, but it took me years to get below the surface of those images and to create a world that felt uh, completely plausible and real and 3D and immersive that I think audiences have never seen before. Um, like we had to, it's actually the early 1960s. It's a long time ago now, and it's harder and harder to recreate uh, that decade with the passage of time. Like the ephemera, the printed relics, they're all disintegrating in our hands, and the vehicles are harder to find, and it's becoming so much a bigger challenge every decade, right? But in particular with Bob Dylan, like um, I really wanted to create a relatable um, world and a setting for him that was telling the story of a 19-year-old kid who had left Minnesota and was setting up a new life in New York City. And we did that by poring over buying every coffee table book and getting all those posters that you were referring to. And then we had the tremendous fortune of getting all of the original negatives that were taken by the photographers who followed Bob Dylan around in the early 1960s, like Daniel Kramer and Don Houston. And we had hundreds and hundreds of super high res stills that had never been before published before, that had never been published. And that were, it was very, very exciting. And it gave us an insight into details that the general public has never seen. Uh, like with Bob Dylan's apartment, that was an unusual space in that we decided to recreate his apartment exactly as it was, um, down to like an insane obsessive compulsive level of detail by matching just about everything that he actually owned. His chair, his record player, typewriter. We rebuilt his desk, rebuilt his handmade furniture, the art on the walls, the magazines, the newspapers, the television, all rebuilt or purchased, and into a space that was completely interactive. You could turn on the stove, you could make a coffee, you could wash the dishes, you could pour a bath. You could look out the window at the neighbors. It was really like the job was creating a time machine that when you went up the steps, you were in Bob Dylan's apartment in 1962. And you could walk around and open and read. You could pick up a newspaper and read it, or go through his record collection and put anything on and listen to his record collection. It was really so much fun, and so much fun for everyone to live in that space while we were shooting.
Yeah, because one of my favorite, the minute I found out like Sylvie Rousseau is going to be in this movie, my favorite album cover of all time is The Free Will and Bob Dylan. Because I've
Yeah.
always said, like, whenever I get engaged, I want my engagement pictures to be that album cover because I love how it looks. I love the feel of it. And to see how this movie kind of recreated the photo shoot that would eventually be the album cover, and then to see it kind of sitting on the background when one of the albums is in there was such a cool way of like bringing that to life. When you have those little like nods, like we don't see the actual picture being taken, but then we saw the photo shoot. We saw the album cover like sitting in another shot. What for you is your favorite little thing like that you got to include in the movie as a whole?
The album covers were a lot of fun, and in particular, we had Don Houston's photos from all the photos that he had taken during that photo shoot. So we were able to remove uh, Suze Rotolo and Bob Dylan from the background and create and upscale the background, and then put Timmy and Elle into that photo as if they're actually there. That was a lot of fun. And it was, and then we printed it and we got rid of like, we actually pumped up the colors so they didn't look faded anymore. Like looked like it was a brand new album. And that's a prop that everybody wanted to keep. It was just so cool, you know, and it had the record in it and everything. Um, but the movie is, there's so many details like that that we recreated. We recreated the first four Bob Dylan albums, a couple of Joan Baez albums. We even recreated a Pete Seeger album. Um, those are really great fun to do. Yeah.
And I do love like there's so much about this movie that I'm just obsessed with, and I can't stop thinking about like the look and the feel of it. But when you have things like kind of the simplicity of Woody Guthrie's uh, hospital room, like there's not much to it outside of the beds that are there, or you have, like you said, the extremely down to detailed look at Bob Dylan's apartment. How did you kind of find the balance of what like how much you wanted to kind of bring to life like Bob Dylan's apartment versus something like that hotel or the I keep saying hotel, the hospital room that is a little bit more kind of sterile and not anything as kind of telling about who Guthrie was with like Bob Dylan's apartment.
Yeah, well, that's what was so much fun about this movie is that there were different categories of sets. There were sets where we wanted to be as true to as real as possible, kind of like recreations of the actual spaces, which is Bob Dylan's apartment, but also Columbia Record Studio A was an exact recreation of the space, down to all the instruments and the microphones and the mixing board. Everything was perfectly recreated because it's iconic. It's like a high holy space where these incredible albums were recorded. We really wanted it to look identical and to also sound identical because it was all live recordings. Then there are other spaces that had to feel right. They weren't exact recreations, but they had to feel like what it must have felt like for Bob to go visit his idol at Greystone Hospital on a Sunday morning in January. Um, Even there was no like historical reference of that meeting, of course, or what Woody Guthrie's room exactly looked like. But I was after capturing a feeling of that institution, where he lived for the last waning years of his life, and what it must have felt like to be in those sort of sterile conditions. Um, and that was, and you do that because you just, as a production designer, one thing that you need a lot of time to think. It's not just picking up a pencil and like drawing a set and like building the walls and let's shoot. You, as I've been doing this for a while now, I realized that a lot of the job is thinking and also being sensitive to um, the evocative nature of spaces and what it feels like to be in them, and how to ultimately what you're trying to do is you're trying to initiate an emotional response within the audience. You're trying to, in other words, you're trying to make the audience feel something, help them feel something through the environment. What does it feel like? Is it cold? Is it dank? Does it smell? Is it like, um, um, and how do you communicate that, if you're looking at going after a sense of solitude or melancholy or joy or freedom or youthfulness, how do you communicate that through the environment? And so it's about like zeroing in on specific details, or working with Jim Mangold about talking about what the backstory of the space, what happened in the months and years leading up to the scene, the extras who are going by in the background, what they are doing. If you look at the movie, I think that uh, it's got tremendous performances with walk-on parts and extras who just walk through the scene, and they're completely real. They feel completely real because they have a sense that they have a purpose, and Jim has worked with them to give them a story. So, and they're great faces that just breeze by, and it helps create a sense of the real world, of capturing a real space.
Thank you so much for having me. Like I said, you recreated things and made me feel like I was living in things that I've loved for most of my life. And so thank you so much for having me, and I can't wait for everyone to get to see A Complete Unknown.
Oh, thank you, Rachel. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
I'm
of
glad you
course.
love the
Have a
movie.
great